In the 90s, early 2000s, rollerblading was absolutely massive and was the fastest growing sport on the planet.
Oh my goodness, well over 10 feet high!
It was in films, television, video games. It was the reason the X Games even started, and it was everywhere.
The Staples Center is going ballistic!
On any given day during the 90s, millions of people across the world were strapping up their skates for a roll around. It was hard to avoid. I mean, there was 29.1 million people doing it. You could safely say it was mainstream. But after 10 years of flying high, it became the victim of its own success and took a huge dip. Now, there's many reasons why this happened, which will inevitably come up. But in today's video, I'm going to focus on why rollerblading isn't mainstream. All the stunts are performed by professionals. Do not attempt this yourself. Before we get tucked into it, if you want to support me, you can give us a like, you can become a member of this channel for $2.99 a month. I've also got merch and a Patreon with exclusive videos. Cheers! Let's kick things off with culture, the lifestyle and everything that surrounds the skating, in particular fashion. Rollerblading was still in its infancy when it shot to the top, so it hadn't developed a strong culture of its own for people to buy into. Despite this, Senate managed to tap straight into youth culture with some provocative marketing that gave the outside world a brand and image for rollerblading. But then skateboarding took a monumental dump on it, and it was soon seen as an uncool copy of their culture, and rollerblading had little history to fall back onto. Since then, rollerblading culture has grown, but not really spread beyond rollerblading, bar collaborations with Brain Dead, Weekend Skateboards, Clark Shoes, and the odd appearance in Vogue magazine. Whereas skateboarding culture can be seen absolutely everywhere. How often do you see people wearing Thrasher, Supreme and Palace? It's not because they skateboard, it's because skate fashion is mainstream fashion.
I don't even know what this is.
So how much did you spend?
Only 400 today, chill day.
You'd struggle to find anybody randomly wearing a rollerblade brand, or even be able to name one. You bowl into the cat and custard pot, and there's Flute Sergeant Steve clad in basement. Highly unlikely. It's worth noting the names of these successful brands. None of them say skateboarding. Look at Nike. What sport is a Nike? They started with running shoes, but they're not called running tick. I feel like there's a few rollerblading brands that pigeonhole themselves. They feel like the community won't buy into it unless they scream, "This is a rollerblading brand." Beyond fashion, when it comes to personalities, again, you'd struggle to find somebody who could name you a famous rollerblader, but everybody seems to know Tony Hawk as if it's part of the school syllabus.
Hey, do a kickflip!
Rollerblading has very few people that transcended the sport. People may recognise names like Arlo Eisenberg and John Julio from the 90s, and Ty Chris is pretty big in France. More recently, Chris Haffey via Nitro Circus, but there are no big personalities that have really gone beyond rollerblading. I'd say our Tony Hawk was John Julio, but I mean, can we even agree on that? As you may have noted, it's going to be pretty hard to escape comparison to skateboarding, as that's the biggest extreme sport, and at one point you were either a rollerblader or a skateboarder. But skateboarding became massive, and it wasn't to do with the tricks, but more so its lifestyle and rich culture that the mainstream had bought into. Skateboarding has plenty of documentaries telling its history of their culture and countless TV shows. Rollerblading has found itself in the media too, but things like MTV Scarred showing gruesome injuries, hardly what you need. One place skateboarding really accelerated was Jackass. Although it wasn't the main feature, it was seamlessly part of it. It wasn't even about being a good skater, it was just the culture surrounding it. It was more about being just a skater.
I was just trying to make rad skate videos, and I was okay at skateboarding, but even back then I knew the best footage was of me slamming.
More examples similar to this can be found in skateboarding through people like Rodney Mullen and Lance Mountain. They weren't doing pranks or acting the goat, but they offered variety and expanded their culture. Rodney came from freestyle and a flatland background into street skating and is credited with inventing a ruck of tricks. It's important to note these were low risk tricks, highly technical but low risk. He wasn't throwing himself down stair sets or doing huge rails. And then there's Lance Mountain. I mean, he wasn't even that good, but he could cruise around and make it look cool. And that's a very key point because it's more relatable and appealing. Not everybody's signing up to be a stuntman. They were offering more ways to get involved and enjoy yourself. So the rollerblading itself is not so much the issue. but it has been on a journey, and I think it's in a much better place now to base everything off. In the 90s, when it was launched into fame, it was discovering itself and it was raw. For the majority of the 2000s and into the 2010s, blading seemed hell-bent on proving that it could do bigger gaps, longer rails, and more outrageously dangerous stunts than any other extreme sport. We really did exceed ourselves in that category. That's a tick. This approach highlighted the potential for amplitude, which was really exciting to watch somebody else do it, but could also be looked at as like an action movie that was just explosion after explosion, sometimes turning into a bit of a horror show as well. I'm not asking for a rom-com here, but just give me a little bit of plot. Give me a bit of story to actually get a hold of. As thrilling as it was one-dimensional, not that relatable, and often overshadowed more creative and stylish skating from the time. Sponsorships and brands leaving, alongside less TV exposure, meant people were less incentivized to do higher risk tricks. The one assumed track to notoriety wasn't working, but this opened rollerblading up, allowing other styles to shine through. Right now, rollerblading is much broader. There is more avenues to get involved with it, so ultimately it makes it more relatable. So we have this amazing sport that has something for everyone, and I think it actually places us better than we were in the 90s. But to develop a culture, you need more than just good rollerbladers. You need artists, you need content creators, you need clothing designers who can create and show the lifestyle of rollerblading in an appealing way. Skateboarding has massively benefited from authentic representation in films like Kids, and more recently mid-90s, which was by Jonah Hill, a huge name in films and someone who loves skate culture, so that's a huge cosign. Other smaller references throughout film history have always shown it as cool as well.
Wow, look at him go!
Rollerblading's had a few movies, but they've hardly represented a true reflection of the culture.
So am I a roller boy now? Not quite.
Many celebs have bought into skateboarding, which obviously doesn't hurt their cause. But like Jonah, there were celebs who liked it before they became famous and have brought it along with them. And there's no better example than Tyler, the Creator, whose whole image seems to be a product of skateboarding.
Hi, I really love you. I love you too.
He added another level to skateboarding and broadened its appeal. If you bought into him, you were essentially buying into skate culture. And this was all without doing much skateboarding at all. Now, I'm not saying we sit around and wait for a Tyler-like character to come along and boost our culture. It might happen, but I think what is a more realistic route, one that's like horribly underutilized and overlooked, is YouTube. There seems to be a specific perception of rollerblading that hangs over it. And for the time being, we won't escape comparison to skateboarding, which is always seen as cooler. So while there isn't an X Games level comp with TV exposure or big corporations pushing it, we can control our own narrative through YouTube. There is great channels adding to the culture, like the Jump Street podcast. You got news from Brandon Drummond. Iconic skater Rashard Johnson has a really wholesome channel. You've got like how-tos and fitness from Acosta Blades, and channels with really big reach as well, like Ricardo Lino, who seems to do it all.
Cheers and see you soon.
But in my honest opinion, rollerblading media is about 10 years behind every other action sport. We have very little presence. There's a desperate need for more content that offers greater insight into lifestyle, culture, and the history of rollerblading. And as much as we need more channels, there should be a focus on quality over quantity. A channel that does really well in parkour is Stockwell. There is high-level parkour, but also lots of interactions between the team members, so you get to know their personalities. And the majority of it is just them having fun with basic level parkour. The episodes are obviously structured and produced to be entertaining, but it always feels authentic and never stoops to novelty. And I believe it'll have a similar kind of effect as Lance Mountain. What's important is relatability. The average person can see themselves doing more simple stuff far more than a huge kink rail. The more that side of rollerblading is shown and presented well, the more people will consider getting involved, as they won't feel like they have to be a completely insane skater to actually enjoy it.
I'm pumped.
There's definitely potential for it with channels like Jumbo, but also brands could expand on the B-roll, showing more interaction with the bladers, breaking down tricks, explaining why things are difficult. It even feels like we're starting to see a little bit more of the lifestyle with consistent tour videos from Mesmer. The history, the lifestyle and culture exists. We just need to present it. Just wrap it up all nice and neat, stick a bow on it and show it to somebody.
Take a look at this.
Let's talk about fans. Let's talk about fans, baby. Let's talk about you and me. With every major sport in the world, there is more people watching than actually doing it. The previous points were all things that you don't necessarily have to skate to get involved with, like clothes, accessories, content. But what people really lose their plot for, what fans go mad for, is competition. We have and have had some really great ones in Winter Clash, Bitter Cold Showdown, The Hoedown, IMYTA, Fees, the Blading Cup, but they're not always that accessible unless you're already involved with rollerblading. Winter Clash had a great live stream which really took it up a level and is what we need more of, as did Bitter Cold, which had TV coverage in the past. The Fees is multidiscipline, so attracts a big audience, and then the Blading Cup is out in the open, so passers-by get to see it. Plus they offer a decent trade fair and other entertainment for people to get involved with, but it still feels like we're missing a few things. Now I could be dreaming here, but what we really need is a league like Street League. It's absolutely huge in skateboarding. There are a calendar of events, it's all associated together, and they have a grand winner at the end. I mean, they actually build parks each time, but maybe we could just start with existing ones. I'm just thinking a more unified drive with a number of events is going to bring in more attention and potentially outside sponsorship, well, more so than single, unrelated events. Plus, who's not buzzing about seeing somebody pick up a massive trophy at the end of the season? Yeah, come on! Chris Haffey's Games of Blade were incredibly popular, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. People love direct competition with each other, so imagine an official Blade League.
What do you get Brian Aragon and Game of Skateboard?
I got nothing.
There is a bit of animosity within rollerblading about it going mainstream. There's a fallacy big corporations will come in and ruin it all. But what are you doing right now in rollerblading that you couldn't continue to do if there was more money and a bigger audience?
And when people say cool, it's cool that we're underground, I say fuck that. These are people risking their lives because they love it, which is rad, good, I'm glad. But don't tell me good that we're underground, let's keep it that way. Those guys should be getting paid.
People assume that small brands would die out. We've been through a bit of a rough ride, so we're fully aware of those who have stuck around and who are really about rollerblading. As much as big brands pose competition, it also brings in way more exposure, which then drips down to these core brands. People will question why I care so much and suggest that rollerblading's fine as it is. I mean, first of all, I love rollerblading, and second of all, we survive. We exist. We're like the Western lowland gorilla, mate. We're critically endangered, and I would love to see the people I've watched all my life get paid for what they do. For 99.9% of people, rollerblading is essentially a hobby and not a career. I'm not expecting it to jump back to 90s levels participation. No, that would be unrealistic. But I think rollerblading has so much more history and culture now that it has a great base to grow from. I genuinely think it could grow in a way that more people would have it as a career. We're not going to get around the fact that you actually have to put the skates on to do it, or the fact that skateboarding took a monumental dump on us.
That is one big pile of shit.
But even if big stars and brands don't flock to it, pouring more into our culture, trying to make these efforts, will just develop it for those who already do it anyway. There's no shame in trying. Big shout out to my Patreons. Your support gives me the time I need to put my heart and soul into these videos and create these things for you, so it's much appreciated. Here's a couple more videos you can watch in the meantime, and see you again soon. Spotty Dog.